they were right.
I'm simply making the point that many people were projecting an oil price much higher than it is just now.
In last night's debate, under pressure from Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish Labour leader said there could be no cuts under a Labour government.
Ed Miliband, in that debate in England that you spoke about, stood last Thursday night and said if Labour is in government, there will be further spending reductions. So, Jim, if it's not £30 billion, what is it?
Well, the IFS have been very clear, Nicola. We don't have to make further cuts
But Ed Miliband
after
said you would.
2015 and 2016. The fact is, folks, we can raise the amount of prosperity there is in our economy if we just treat people properly.
Shadow Chancellor Ed Balls challenged that claim today. At every turn, it seems Scotland is driving this general election's content and may yet decide its outcome. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, Aberdeen.
Well, let's return to our main election news tonight and whether Labour are onto a vote winner with their pledge to clamp down on non-doms. I'm joined from Westminster by Chris Leslie, Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. Chris, you've been saying, your party has been saying that this will raise hundreds of millions of pounds. Where are you getting those figures from?
Well, we've been able to announce today our package of abolishing this anachronistic non-dom status, but we're also doing it in a way that manages to have a temporary arrangement for those who are genuinely short-term visitors into the UK.
OK, so where are you getting those figures from?
Well, the figures, it's very difficult to know. There's lots of different estimates, but if you look at, for example, Jolyon Maugham, one of the leading tax barristers, has published today his estimate on a very conservative basis, looking at the amounts of assets and activities that are overseas, thinking about how many of those might be taxed in the UK. He thinks it's upwards of £1 billion and above.
Okay,
but ultimately, so there is money to be raised here.
Sorry, we're quite short of time. Let me just pick up on that tax barrister you quoted there, who is a Labour supporter. I'm sure you'd admit that. He said, and I quote, "We can't know what will happen when this change is introduced." And he even said there's a risk of a negative tax yield.
Well, of course, what we don't know is quite how much is squirreled away in all these tax havens. That's the whole point. We've got to clamp down on some of this tax avoidance. But don't forget, Kathy, there's a lot of people, very rich people out there, who are keen to live in London and live in the United Kingdom. In fact, they're permanently resident here, like most of the rest of it. But they have a different rule. There's one rule for that jet set, and whereas everybody else, the vast majority, have to pay their full taxes wherever their income comes from. That's just not fair.
You admit, though, that you don't know how much this would raise, and indeed, as your Shadow Chancellor has said, it could end up costing money. You accept that that is a possibility?
Well, only if you didn't have this arrangement for temporary, genuine residents who are coming in, perhaps they're students, businessmen,
well, no, the tax barrister you quoted, said there is a risk of a negative tax yield, even taking into account this new policy.
No, I think we've managed to come up with a solution that takes account of those particular issues. If we hadn't done that, that was what Ed Balls was talking about, but we've come up with a design that I think a lot of people will say, yes, this is a fairer way of approaching things. The tax avoidance situation has been around for so long. After all, George Osborne's not fulfilled his promise on the deficit, so we do need to raise revenues in a fair way. Tackling tax avoidance is the right thing to do, and I think a lot of people are going to be left asking all the political parties, whose side are they on? But, and when they hear the Conservatives with all these distractions and smokescreens defending the indefensible, that I think is the big contrast.
OK, but just very briefly, you're backing this out of principle rather than necessarily because it will raise money, is that correct?
Well, of course the principle is the big issue, but there is revenue to be raised here, and I think, you know, if we make sure that we design this correctly, focus on getting rid of this anachronistic 200-year-old system that people who are perhaps even born here, brought up in Britain, but they exploit it because they're part of a very rich elite, I don't think that is fair on the vast majority of everybody else.
Okay.
We want people to pay their taxes fairly. Unfortunately, the Conservatives oppose this.
Chris Leslie, thank you very much for joining us. John.
And later in the programme, we're in Birmingham, where musician Apache Indian is finding out why ethnic voters feel turned off by mainstream politics.
Hi, this is me, Apache Indian, right here on the Channel 4 News.